Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Frontierland, the first show in 2023. I'm really excited for tonight's show because it combines two passions of mine, cricket and conservation. But I hope you've had a good start to 2023. For me, it's certainly been wonderful. I've travelled around South Africa. I'm looking at some wonderful stories in terms of its history. I've also watched some amazing cricket recently. Here in the Eastern Cape, we've just gone cricket crazy. The Sunrisers have been in town. And as I said, we've just had a wonderful summer of cricket. So tonight I'm going to speak to somebody who certainly knows his cricket, but also is involved in conservation here in the Eastern Cape. Mr. Mark Rushmere, those cricket fans will know, played back in the early 90s for South Africa, but now he's involved in one of the most wonderful game reserves here in South Africa. So welcome again to Frontierland, and I hope you enjoy tonight's show. Mark, would you like to take a seat?
Hi, Dean, am I allowed to
shake
your hand?
Nice to see you.
Nice to be here.
Nice to see you. Nice to see you. Well, welcome to Frontierland. And I think, given our shared interests and what I'm doing here, of course, in the Eastern Cape, is writing a history of wildlife tourism. And one of the first family names I heard of was the Rushmeres. Your dad, Colin, of course, great man by all accounts, set up Kariega Game Reserve, which you're involved in now, of course. How did that come about, and what was his vision in those early days?
Yeah, interesting question. Dad was he was a lawyer, but he was very entrepreneurial, a real businessman. But he had, together with my mom, they had a passion for conservation and wildlife. And this opportunity, came across his desk in 1989. And he effectively bought the first portion of what Kariega is today. Back then it was only 660 hectares. And he bought it in, I think it was about September 1989. And off he went. And it was very much humble beginnings. I can assure you, a lot of people thought he was crazy to do what he was doing, and I thought it would never work. We had a few giraffe running around the place, which he introduced, a couple of zebra, antelope, that type of thing. But so that was in the early sort of 1990. Then built the chalets of what is Main Lodge today, and we were just very fortunate as a family that there was another mad guy in the Eastern Cape called Adrian Gardner, and he started Shamwari in 2001. But his vision was to start an international game reserve from day one, and off he went. I think he started with 2,000 hectares. That's how big Shamwari was, and Adrian took him, 5 or 6 years to sort of make Shamwari start working. I think, I chatted to Paul, his son, quite a few times, and he said to me that his dad almost closed Shamwari about 5 times. Well, thank goodness for our family and for a lot of other families in the Eastern Cape. He didn't, and here we are, all today, and in what has become a great game reserve destination in South Africa, being the Eastern Cape.
Well, I've got the privilege of writing the history of wildlife tourism in this part of the country. As we know, we're going up against probably a better known concept called the Kruger Park further in the north. But I think we've got something unique here, haven't we? We've got so many different biospheres. The environment looks different. And it's also softer. And we've got this idea of evolution, that previously used agricultural land is now being rewilded. And this is the idea. And I believe you're involved in some of that project.
Yeah, we must remember that 100 to 200 years ago, the Eastern Cape was teeming with wild animals. Yeah. Being lion, elephants, everything was down in the Eastern Cape. And then man shot it out and created farms. And so we've basically come back and rewilded what belonged to the animals 100 to 200 years ago. So it was always a natural land for them, and that's why the Eastern Cape has worked. It's a natural area for game. And then we're just very lucky that we're situated in a great part of South Africa, with our proximity to Cape Town and the Garden Route. I think the stats show that 85% of international people who come to South Africa go to Cape Town at some stage of their trip. So a lot of them come down the Garden Route and end up doing an Eastern Cape Game Reserve experience. And then the other thing is that we are a malaria-free destination, and that also is quite a plus factor for the Eastern Cape. But yeah, look, the Kruger area is a fantastic area in our country. I've been there on quite a few occasions, but we don't have to stand back for them much. We've got an unbelievable area here in the Eastern Cape. It's different, but that's what makes it great as well.
Let's go back to the start then. What was your dad's vision? I mean, you mentioned Adrian Gardner. These are pioneers. They can see how a land can be used in an alternative way, of course. I think you'll agree that Adrian took this concept to an international market, but the Rushmeres were here first, weren't you? You saw the potential, or your father saw the potential, should I say, to actually encourage tourism through an alternative use of the land.
Yeah, I think Dad, I heard him say on a few occasions when they started Kariega, he had a partner at that stage called Andrew Savage. And their idea was they wanted to create something here in the Eastern Cape so people didn't have to travel all the way up to Kruger to have a wildlife experience. And that was a little bit of a vision of his. And, but the thing is, when you're entrepreneurial and you start something, I don't think you really know where you're going to end up. And I think if Dad was sitting here now, he would say, yeah, he had this great vision of what Kariega is today. I'm not sure he really did in those early years, because yeah, he did have a vision, but luck played a part in terms of what Kariega is today, which is 11,500 hectares. It's about 25 different farm title deeds that have been put together to create Kariega Game Reserve. So to create a parcel of land like that is not easy. It's taken us 33 years. Our last land acquisition, Kariega's land acquisition, was about a year ago. And now we've sort of completed the land assembly that became our vision as we went along.
And when you say us, it's very much a family concern, isn't it, at the moment?
Yeah, it's always been a family concern. Being a cricketer, I suppose I needed a job outside of cricket, so I sort of, Dad always said, no, you come and work for me somehow. When I started with him at the beginning of 1990, in the middle of my cricket career, there was no cricket, it had just started. But my brother, so I've been involved sort of from the start of when Kariega started, other than 3 years in Johannesburg when I played for Transvaal. But my brother Graham, who's a lawyer as well, he's been involved in the early years from a distance, in that he put a lot of the agreements together with Dad, land acquisitions, etc., etc. And then my sister Lindy, and then Graham came back in 2008 and got fully involved in running Kariega with me. And then my sister's been involved fully since about 2018. But the Fuller family are partners in Kariega, and they got involved when they threw in a portion of land which they were farming in 1998, and that enabled us to put sort of together the 2,000 hectares which is on the Kariega riverside of what Kariega is today.
Now, I've had the privilege of going to some of the most beautiful game reserves in this country. Kariega is certainly, if not the most beautiful, because you've got such a variety of landscape. There's a river that runs through it, of course. It's got this biodiversity, of course, and you've got the big five. I mean, they're fully supported there, aren't they?
Yes, no, we've got the big five, and yeah, we're very fortunate. We've got a very beautiful setting, a very beautiful game reserve. We've got two river valleys. The one we border, and it also runs through our reserve a little bit, the Kariega River. But the Bushman's River runs right the way through the middle of Kariega on the western side for about 20 kilometers, which is very unique. And it's very undulating Kariega, and we've got this valley thicket, euphorbias. So we've got vantage points where you're looking down, views and vistas and that type of thing. So we are very fortunate in the landscape that we've managed to put together, and yeah, very much Big Five. I mean, if I look back, we introduced Lion and Elephants way back in 2004 after watching what Adrian did at Shamwari, and they sort of released Lion into a 5-hectare area to start with. Then they released them into the wild. We just released them. We said if Shamwari can do it, we can do it. So it's been a real journey, but a very challenging and rewarding 33-year journey today, John.
And we were just chatting earlier, I believe you're talking about releasing. You've just got a new addition to the Kariega family. You've got leopard. You're trying to
so you get natural Cape leopard in the Eastern Cape, but very difficult to get leopard sightings. They're very elusive. We obviously over the years we've had leopard sightings on Kariega, but very, very difficult to see leopard at the likes of Kariega and some of the other game reserves. But we've started a sort of leopard reintroduction, rehabilitation program, and we built a leopard boma about 6 months ago, and a farmer caught a leopard, and instead of shooting them because of killing their livestock, they'd rather give them to the game reserves. So we've had this male leopard in a boma for about 5 months, and I actually only saw it for the first time. I was with friends over the weekend, and we went round and looked at the boma, and literally the boma is about 2/3 the size of half a rugby field, so not that big. And it took us 20 minutes to find the leopard in the boma. That's how elusive they are. And then they're going to collar the leopard and release it and see what it does. We've got another leopard lined up, apparently, a female. So we're just starting to see how we can rehabilitate leopard on Kariega. So it'll be very interesting to see what this leopard does. Apparently they opened the sort of doors of the boma and it hasn't left the boma yet, and that's 24 hours ago. So it's interesting to see what's going to happen next. But yeah, you just keep moving forward and you keep trying to get better and better.
Yeah, no, having spoken to a lot of people in this area, I mean, you're literally learning on the job. You bring in the experts, of course, but it's trial and error, isn't it?
Correct.
And because you're pioneers 30 years ago, this land was being used very differently. You're rewilding previously used agricultural land, albeit in Kariega that you have these wonderful pockets of almost wild land where you didn't even know really what was down there, did you?
I think a lot of Kariega was very poor cattle farms,
yeah.
You know what I mean? Because there's so much of this valley thickets, and then you've got the river, the Bushman River Valley. So we're fortunate in that it doesn't look like previously farmed land, a lot on Kariega.
Yeah. But let's go back to the start then. So your dad had this vision, Colin, and it's a revered name, Colin Rushmere in this area. Everyone I speak to talks about him as the man with this vision, and he was very passionate about, obviously, the landscape, very passionate about the Eastern Cape. Now, you're a PE family, but unlike, say, some of your brothers who went into mainstream professions, you let sport lead you. So you obviously, I'm a big cricket fan, and I want to just talk a little bit about that. When did you know you were going to play cricket at a decent level?
I think so. I went to Woodridge together with my brothers. My dad went to Woodridge Prep, and we were boarders from the age of 9. And we loved Woodridge. And I sort of, from a little boy, I sort of used to always be the guy maybe who made the most runs in the team. So I sort of realized like I could play a little bit. I had a father who was a cricketer, mad cricketer. Yeah. So when I was 2, I had a cricket bat in my hands. That's how it happened. And then I was very small at school. I only grew sort of matric and after school really. So I was a late developer. So I wasn't a big guy, but I sort of made the first team in my grade 10 year. And then I was picked I just missed out in selection in those days it was called the EP Nuffield team. In 1981, in my grade 11 year, I just missed out, and actually my good mate Dave Callahan got picked. It was probably between the two of us, and we were both sort of fairly young. And then the following year, I started making a lot of runs at Woodridge, and I got picked as captain for the EP Nuffield side, and I got picked to captain SS Schools that year. Right. And then I did like a post-matric where it was almost like a cricket year. I went and played for 5 months overseas. This was in 1983. Where I played for Sussex. Garth LaRue and Imran Khan were the pros then. And I played for the Sussex second 11, a very good standard of cricket for my development as a cricketer at that stage. But I was allowed to go back to school first term and last term and play schoolboy cricket still. So I captained the EP Nuffield side again, and I captained the SS Schools side again. So when I left school, I had a bit of a name, and then I'd made a lot of hundreds at school, and I probably did realize then that maybe I can go on to play for EP. That was your first aim type of thing. And in many ways I was probably fortunate. Jeff Dakin had been a big administrator in EP cricket, and then my dad took over as EP president in about 1983, which coincided with me sort of pushing for EP selection. And they got very professional, and then and they were looking to go for the youngsters, and build a team. And then they got, obviously the big coup was getting Kepler Wessels and then Kenny McKeown. So we got 2 like really senior statesman batsmen, and Kepler was a hard taskmaster in that he was really professional because he'd been playing in Australia. We had all been isolated, and then together, then they blended experience with youth, and I was lucky enough to be one of those young players together with my good mate Philip Am, who's sadly no longer with us. And then we opened, and then Kepler and Kenny batted 3 and 4, and then Dave Callahan 5, and people like Flam Micha. And then we had good guys, and Tim Shaw and Dave Richardson, those sort of guys. And then we got we were allowed to have a few international players in our team, and Kepler managed to get a couple of really good fast bowlers. And the names that come to mind in the early days are Greg Thomas and Rod McCurdy. And we had Larry Hobson as a leggy, but Tim was our left arm spinner. And so we managed to put together a good team. And yeah, but in those early years, you never know if you're good enough. So when I started playing, it was a hard time, but I sort of got more and more confidence. And we ended up playing in the great era of EP cricket. So I was very, very fortunate.
Well, I know it's not your first time in the Gino studio, as it were. You came in with the guys, didn't you? It's one of the most popular shows we've had on the Gino Spot. Is when that glory team, shall we say, that wonderful era of EP cricket came in, which was fantastic. But you obviously were destined for better things. But what I wanted to ask you is, we have to talk about what was happening in terms of South African politics at the time. That we know what was happening in the late 80s, early 90s, this move to democracy, of course, the end of apartheid. And you were part of an incredible team that were the first to play in the post-isolation open international cricket, of course. And you played at the World Cup in 1992, of course, in Australia and New Zealand. And then you went on to represent South Africa in the first ever test match, post-isolation test match in Bridgetown, Barbados. So now you're in Australia, you're in the West Indies. I mean, in the 90s, they are strong teams, they're strong environments. What was it like to be thrust into that kind of arena?
Yeah, looking back, it all happened very, very quickly. I mean, we had the Gatting Rebel Tour, I remember, which was, and it sort of got aborted halfway through the tour. And then suddenly, I mean, literally, we sort of heard that a South African team was going to India for 3 one-day internationals. I remember, and that's when I wasn't picked in that, but Clive Rice was captain. And off the guys went. Literally, they had 5 days, and they were in that team, and off they went to play in India. And I don't know if you remember those first games. And we had 3 one-day internationals in India, and then the news was that we were accepted back in the World Cup. It happened very quickly. People like Jeff Dake and Ali Bacher, they were instrumental. They were administering South African cricket at that stage, and suddenly a team was going to get picked. And I remember I had a bit of really good form just before the side was picked. I made a big 100 against Transvaal at the Wanderers, I remember, and I'd had a good season. And yeah, there was a lot of controversy with the selection because, I mean, if I had to be honest with you, I mean, our senior statesmen like Clive Rice, Jimmy Cook, and I think of 3 guys, Clive, Jimmy, and Peter Kirsten, they sort of pushed them aside. They were all in their late 30s, I think, pushed them aside, and they went for Kepler as captain. Probably you couldn't have Kepler and Racey in the same team, I suppose. They had to go with one. And then they left out Jimmy, and maybe I was a little bit lucky, but I got selected. They then brought back Peter Kirsten, so he did play and he had a great tournament. And off we went to the World Cup. Suddenly we were on the plane and it was like, gee, we're going to a World Cup. And, we were all a little bit overawed. I must have, how good were we? We had, I remember that first game, I was 12th man, the first game against Australia. Literally, it might have been a 20, 25-minute bus trip to the ground. There wasn't a word spoken on the bus. It was just silence. I think everyone was so nervous. We were going into the cauldron of world cricket. How good were we? The only guy who sort of knew what was going on was Kepler Wessels, because he had, recently, fairly recently, still played for Australia and had played international cricket. So, and I don't know if you all remember that first ball that Alan Donald bowled. He had Jeff Marsh caught behind and given not out. That was the first ball of the World Cup from a South African point of view.
That's what happens in Australia, though, Mark. Unfortunately, they'll never change, will they? Let's face it. But talk about going into the cauldron, and you played in some of the meccas of world cricket, didn't you, during that tournament?
Yeah, look, I mean, you suddenly, we had just been watching highlights for 20 years as youngsters, and and you all thought that international cricket was just they played on another level, and suddenly we were in it, and because 20 years is a long time to be isolated as a country, and then you suddenly played at places like the Sydney Cricket Ground, all these famous grounds we'd sort of watched highlights on, Adelaide, magnificent oval, the Wacker at Perth, which was world-renowned as a sort of a fast, bouncy pitch, and and then the MCG, which was an unbelievable. I remember fielding on the boundary there, and you'd heard how big it was. I remember trying to throw a ball, and I think I got about halfway. I mean, geez, not that I had a big arm anyway. If any of my mates are up there listening, they'll probably laugh at that. But yeah, so it was wonderful. Then we went over to New Zealand and played in some great grounds then, and then we had a very successful tournament, and we got to the semi-finals
against my old country, England.
Correct, against England, and then it got to, if I remember correctly, Dave Richardson and Brian McMillan batting. We needed 22 and 13 balls, and then the rain came, and then with the Duckworth, Lewis order, then 22 and 7 balls, and then 22 and 1 ball. In the modern game, 22 of 13 balls, you'd win 90% of the time. Not that in those days you would, but so we actually had a pretty good chance. And then, yeah, that's what happened. And there were quite a few tears in the changing room. But I think we did really well. So it was great times, very interesting times. Yeah.
But the wider context for you as a team, I had the privilege recently of interviewing an athlete that was a sprinter in the first 1992 Olympics post-isolation, which was incredible. And she was aware, of course, of the wider picture. You were representing not only a cricketing nation, you were representing a nation that was a pariah of the world, that had been out of circulation in terms of international competition for decades. Were you ever advised on how to act and how to respond? And were you ever asked, particularly as cricketers, political questions?
Maybe the captain, Kepler, and the management were asked political questions more. We weren't. I can't really remember being asked political questions. We knew what was going on, obviously, and that we were real ambassadors now for South Africa, and we'd been isolated for 20 years, etc. But yeah, we sort of got into it pretty quickly, and at the end of the day, it's a sport. Politics shouldn't be involved, and yeah, we sort of made the most of it, and it was very exciting, and yeah, it's wonderful memories, and the word got back that the whole of South Africa was watching us play in the World Cup. That housewives and people who didn't know much about the game were sitting through the night watching the game, and people were exhausted when they went to work the next day. So it certainly caught the imagination of South Africa because we had been isolated for 20 years, and we just didn't have this competition. So
you nearly got to the final. I mean, you were a success as well. And then what happened with the Test match selection? I mean, you're keeping out someone like Jimmy Cook. I'm a Somerset boy, so I mean, he still holds records there at the county ground in Taunton. Absolute prolific batsman. So you've come in, you're almost a new generation, but you're relatively mature in your cricketing career. I mean, you've been around for a while, so that must have put pressure on you.
Yeah. Look, I sort of played it. I was halfway through my career. I started at like 19, 20. I stopped at 35, and I was 28 years old when we went to the World Cup. So I was literally halfway through. But I mean, geez, Jimmy Cook. I mean, I get on really well, Jimmy. And I played with him for Transvaal when I went to play for Transvaal. And what a great batsman! I mean, in all things being equal, Jimmy Cook would have played over 100 Test matches for South Africa. I have no doubt about that.
Yeah.
And together with a lot of other players, So they're all we produced some of our greatest sportsmen in this country between 1970 and 1990. We really did in rugby and cricket, and it's sad that they weren't seen properly on the international stage. But we, as they were our heroes, we know how good they were. I mean, they were unbelievable. A lot of them.
I've got to ask, what was it like in the West Indies? I mean, that's a different level, different environment.
Yeah, that was even more interesting, because now we're going to the West Indies, and the West Indies are dominated Test cricket and cricket really from about the late 70s, when they were pulverized by the Aussies in Australia, I think. And then Clive Lloyd said, right, we're going to get 4 fast bowlers now, and then they dominated world cricket from about 1976, 77 to about 1995 for the next 20 years. And so they were known as they had the greatest fast bowlers in the world. And yeah, I am an opening batsman. And I always thought to myself, funny enough, if I ever got a chance to play a Test match, I don't really want to play against the West Indies in the West Indies. And that's the one I got with Andrew Hudson as our opening partners. And looking back, I mean, I'd faced guys like Alan Donald, Sylvester Clarke, and a lot of other fast bowlers in this country. And they were no quicker. Guys like Curtly Ambrose and Courtney Walsh were no quicker than Alan Donald. And they were great fast bowlers, make no mistake. And they were the opening pair. I mean, they were 2 famous West Indies fast bowlers. And for the first time in my career, and the only time in my career, I put a chest pad on. So did Andrew Hudson, and so did Peter Kirsten.
Wow.
Kepler didn't. I mean, Kepler was the toughest bastard you ever met, so he didn't need anything. But we thought we were going to face the firing squad of it, Jesus. And I remember we got on we bowled first, and then we got about 10 overs or 12 overs to face. Or 8 overs about Hudson and I had to go out, and we survived. And I remember it was tough. Obviously, I mean, Curtly Ambrose is a great bowler. I mean, and Courtney Walsh, but they didn't give you many scoring opportunities, and we survived. And then I realized, hell, you can sort of play it. It's not like I have faced sort of guys like this before. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But yeah, so mentally it was very different because we'd been isolated for so long to be that first guy in a test match in the West Indies.
Yeah.
And we should have won that test. I mean, but they were so motivated. We were 2 down, and we needed about 74 runs on the last day to win. And Courtney Walsh and Curtly Ambrose bowled 12 overs each on the trot. And we lost all 8 wickets for about 50 runs and lost about 20 runs.
Wow.
Yeah, the wicket got a bit up and down, but you could just see the guys in the change room. Geez, the guys were starting to pad up, and there was a bit of chaos in the change room. And we thought we had the game won, and they didn't want to lose to South Africa, and they came back and beat us.
Was that added edge? You know, obviously the West Indies against South Africa. Was that kind of edge? Did you detect it?
No,
did you get any? You know, the sledging? Or
nothing, no nasty sledging or anything like that. Not much sledging at all, really. Obviously, bowlers in the heat of the moment, that sort of thing. But I think from their point of view, you know, we were the South Africa, the pariah of the world, the apartheid era, all that type of thing. I think from their side, they didn't want to lose to South Africa. You know what I mean? And that came out clearly on that last morning, where they were desperate to beat us, because we had. It was a 90% chance we were going to win that game. Yeah. And they beat us. You know?
Yeah. I've often said cricket was one of the most probably. One of those games you play in your head more than anything. You think about it, it's the only sport you don't know when you're going to be performing. And you've got to be ready as a batsman at a moment's notice. Obviously, an opening batsman, you've got an idea, but to be ready and to go out there. And it's one-on-one, isn't it? It's literally you against the bowler, regardless of everything else that's going on. So it's just a privilege to speak to anybody who's ever faced those kind of bowlers. But as you said, they were in your head because you imagined something out of this world.
We imagined something bigger than it was because we'd been isolated for so long.
Yeah.
But cricket is very much played in the head. Yeah. And especially batting. Yeah. Batting is the only game in the world that I know of where when you're out, you get kicked off the field. Oh. You leave the arena. Yeah. You know, if you're playing golf and you hit it into the bush, take a triple bogey, you carry on and you sort of play in the tournament. But cricket, you're off the field. So mentally, it's a very, very tough game. Batting, bowling's a bit different because you don't get kicked off the field. As a batsman,
as a batsman, you're reacting to something. A bowler, you're actually instigating the movement, aren't you? And I wanted to ask you about that because we've seen that in recent years. Certainly, batsmen who have suffered with mental health. I mean, obviously, some of the England players, and it's more openly discussed. I mean, how did you cope with the stresses of high level sport? Because
it was tough. You felt like you were always living on the edge. You know, as a cricketer, you sort of, and you felt everyone was watching, all your friends and family and people were watching your performances. So, and when you were making runs, you felt like on top of the world. But when you went through a slump or you weren't, you really felt low. And you had to have that ability to try and stay even keeled. And some people are better at that than others. In other words, when you're performing really highly, don't let yourself get blown away with it too much. And don't get too down when you're not scoring runs. And I'm talking really from a batsman's point of view. But it was mentally tough. I mean, I think of a guy like Gary Kirsten, who was a good friend of mine in cricket, and he did unbelievably well to play 100 test matches for his country and perform like he did. And he retired at the age of 36, and he told me personally that he was mentally finished. He could have carried on for another year or two, but mentally he was exhausted of the pressure of having to keep performing. You know, and even a guy like, Graham Smith says, he was mentally finished. Graham Smith, he was this guy, big guy, unbelievable player, but he had to build himself up to face the quickest bowlers in the world all the time. He did it for about 114 tests for about 12 years, opening the batting from the age of 20. That's an unbelievable achievement. But at the age of 32, 33, he couldn't do it anymore. He was finished mentally. You know, and it's happened to a lot of people, And I suppose it depends where you bat in order. Opening batsman is quite a pressurized position, and so I think it's a game. It's quite nice to be an all-rounder. If you can bat and bowl, it's sort of less pressure. But it's mentally. So I think any sport is like that. Though. Mentally, it's tough to keep performing at the highest level all the time.
And why didn't you play more for South Africa? You didn't have disasters in those early games. You would have liked to score more runs. But what happened?
I played 3 of the games at the World Cup. I made 36 in the one game where Peter was injured. I batted number 3 against Pakistan when Jonty Rhodes had that brilliant run out. I played Sri Lanka, but I ended up batting down the order. I got in with about an over 2 to spare, and I made 10 against the West Indies batting at number 4. So I didn't have many opportunities. I then went to the West Indies. I played one of the one-day internationals. I got a 30, and then I didn't get runs in the 2 innings against the West Indies. I batted for quite a bit of time, and I showed myself, and I think I showed a few people I was capable. And then I actually had a good season, after the World Cup. But you still had guys like Jimmy Cook around, and obviously he was obviously upset he didn't get picked, and there was a lot of controversy. And then he actually got picked, then I think for the next Test series, against India, if I can remember correctly, when we came back. And I got left out. I remember Kepler coming to me and saying that I was a bit unlucky because I was actually playing well at the time. And but I accepted it. Jimmy was a great player. I mean, and then maybe I had 1 or 2 in different seasons. Then other guys start coming through, like a Gary Kirsten. Like Andrew was already in the team. So Gary suddenly started really performing well, and then guys like Daryl Cullen, who weren't involved in the World Cup. So there are a lot of good players out there. Not easy to play for your country. So obviously I would have, and maybe my strength, as a player, I was known to be a really good player of spin bowling, and I think I could have performed quite well in the subcontinent.
Yeah.
But I never got that opportunity. Maybe in countries like India, Pakistan, Sri Lanka, I think I could have been quite effective. So it's also horses for courses as batsmen. You know what I mean? So it's the way it worked out. And I've got no regrets. I gave it my best shot, and what happened. And guys like Hansi came through. I mean, and he did well. And so there were a lot of good players. Who suddenly there was international cricket, and that's what happened. Yeah.
I mean, you're very, very philosophical. As I said, you got to play for your country, which I think is an incredible achievement anyway. No matter how many caps you get. Now we're watching a game, of course, we've experienced it here in the Eastern Cape, certainly this SA20. We've got a local team, we're all enthralled by this bang, big hitting sort of extravaganza. What are your views on it? Because I've met many purists in cricket who say, oh no, this is the death of it. I had the privilege of meeting Michael Holden, would you believe, and he still doesn't watch a T20. He's absolutely averse to this kind of cricket. Never mind one-day internationals, this is just taking it too far. What are your views? I know you've enjoyed some of the games.
Yeah, it was interesting. When it first started, I never played a T20 game in our careers. When it first started, I also thought it was a bit of a slog and a bit of a hit and giggle. And I think that's how the players sort of viewed it in the beginning. But I must say, as the game has evolved, the skills that these guys have in T20 cricket is amazing. I mean, the way they play these, get down on one knee against the guys bowling 150 and they just tip it and goes over the keeper's head. I mean, or reverse sweeps. I mean, we never even tried shots like that. The game hadn't evolved to that level. So I have become more and more impressed. I think it's tough being a bowler in the current environment. But I think I think there's definitely a place for it, and I think it's good for tournament cricket. Like we've got the SA20 in South Africa. I think it's been an unbelievable tournament just at the right time. You've got the IPL, which is an unbelievable tournament. You've got the Big Bash in Australia, etc. But the true test of a cricketer and a batsman is Test cricket. Let's be honest. There are lots of people who can play T20 cricket, but there are not a lot who can play Test cricket. And you can play 100 Test matches for their country and average above 40. There are not a lot of people who can do that because you get tested in so many different ways. You get tested mentally. I don't think you get tested as much mentally in T20 cricket. You get tested with courage in Test cricket. Have you got guts? Can you face fast bowling, etc.? In T20 cricket, you're actually trying to get out of the way of a fast bowler and either do this or do that. Whereas in Test cricket, you're trying to get into line, behind the ball. So it's very different. So you don't want to lose Test cricket. And I think from a bowler's perspective, I think a lot of them would say that, fast bowlers, maybe like Rabada and these guys, they enjoy Test cricket because they bowl long spells and it's proper, But they've got more opportunity there where it's just 4 overs and everyone's trying to hit you out the park. And when you're unlucky, anyone can hit you out the park, type of thing. But I think there's T20 cricket's great. There's a place for it, but you've got to find that balance still. You've got to keep Test cricket going. And it's quite sad that South Africa, the next 2 or 3 years, they haven't got a lot of Test matches. I mean, the Ashes is coming up now starting in about June, July, and that's unbelievable cricket always. And we've always produced great Test teams in this country, and there's no reason why we can't continue doing that. But yeah, I enjoy all forms of cricket, and I've got to admire T20 players more because they've got skills, like incredible skills they've developed, and the fielding obviously in all forms of cricket has developed dramatically, much better than in our day. They're athletes now. they're athletic, they train, but they're very professional. They get paid so much money, they can spend all day training for cricket. They can make a lot of money out of the game now, which is wonderful for the current players. Yeah.
You're not bitter about that? The fact that your generation didn't probably profit from the game. I mean, you were professional, of course, but the kind of money they make from today, endorsements, and the fact they can travel around the world picking their tournaments. I mean, almost, and they've adapted the game for that. I mean, would you have been able to do that? Do you think?
Look, it would have been nice. Let's face it, but I'm not bitter. I mean, at least I had the opportunity to play international cricket, and I played a little bit of it. People like Barry Richards played 4 Test matches. I mean, some of our stars in this country didn't even play international cricket. They should be more bitter than me. But you do look at what these guys get paid now, and you think to yourself, jeepers, it's unbelievable money. So it would have been nice. But I've been fortunate to go into another career, being conservation and developing a game reserve. So I've been lucky. But for a lot of sportsmen, it's not easy, because these guys, the current guys, can set themselves up for life, whereas sportsmen in yesteryear, some of them should have been set up for life and never had to do another thing. They entertained so many people in the world, and they were born at the wrong time. But that's life.
No,
life's not fair.
No, well, it's incredible. I mean, I'm a sports historian by trade, and you look at something like soccer, where the lads back in the 40s and 50s were earning the same as the guys in the factory, and all of a sudden that changed. But even you look at the professionals now, as you said, if they can manage that money well, they can set themselves up for life. But there's always this idea of what's going to happen after the sport, because we've all played sport at a decent level. You certainly at an international level. You miss that changing room. You miss the structure that sports give you in terms of the training, in terms of your match day. But you filled it now with something really fulfilling, of course.
Yeah, I was probably one of the lucky ones. I had something to get my teeth into. It was tough, getting a game reserve off the ground. I worked very hard. But I think for a lot of sportsmen who play at a high level, life after sport is not easy. I mean, and people talk about mental health and all these types of things, and I think it's very relevant. And sadly, some sportsmen don't really find their feet after sport, because also, life's long, and you need to find, even if it's not for money, you need to find something after sport to get you up in the morning, to fulfill you. You need to find something. You need to find another challenge in your life, and sport provides it to a certain age. I mean, obviously, a sport like golf, the guys can play their whole lives. That's one sport. But sports like rugby, cricket, tennis, you can only play to a certain sort of age. So it is tough for a lot of people. But I think the world realizes that, and there's lots of help for people after sport and that sort of thing. And as I say, they are better off financially now, a lot better off, and they can set themselves up, and then they've got to try and find something after sport that can stimulate them and give them a new self, if you know what I mean. Find something that drives them.
Well, you've certainly found something that drives you, and we're talking about cricket. I was sitting in the stands recently at Bloemfontein for the one-day international between South Africa and England, and I struck up a conversation with the English couple next to me, and I asked them where they were going after this, expecting them to fly up to the Kruger Park, of course. They said, no, we're flying to Port Elizabeth. We're going to a place called Kariega Game Reserve. And I was delighted that they had seen the light, that come to the Eastern Cape. We have something special here. But I want to talk about the future of tourism, certainly in this area, and wildlife tourism. And this idea of linking with the community as well. I know it's something that your sister is very passionate about. To make the work we do sustainable, it's all very well bringing international tourists, but we have to have the buy-in of local communities, don't we?
Definitely. And we've got a brilliant foundation now, which my sister came in to drive more sort of professionally from the beginning of about 2018. And in a way, what happened there was we started a conservation and community levy. Other game reserves in South Africa were doing it. In the Eastern Cape, Kwanwe were doing it, Shamwari were doing it. And then we heard a lot of the guys up north were doing it. And basically, our first levy for 2 years was 130 Rand per guest per night, over and above what they paid to come to stay at one of Karega's lodges. I think, and then today that levy is about 170 Rand. And that brings in really good funding that we can run foundations properly and do proper community projects, conservation projects, etc., etc. So we've got an unbelievable foundation. But I'll tell you what, she would be a good person to get in the show if you start talking to her about just foundation work they do. I mean, it's incredible what we do today. And so there is a buy-in from our local communities, and they know we're doing a lot for them. And we obviously went through very tough times in COVID, and we brought them through it. But you need sustainability. But I think we've all got the model, and your international clients or clients that come to Kariega, they're very happy to pay this levy. It's not a lot of money for them, especially if you convert it to pounds, euro, or dollars. It's a very small sum, but it helps us to run proper foundations.
And the next generation, I believe you support school children coming along to see what you're doing with the land, of course. They need to understand that this is a sustainable model, of course. And I've been around local people who haven't even seen wildlife in its natural environment, and just to see the amazement. We tend to think here in Africa that everybody experiences it. They don't, do they?
100%. We're often doing, from our local communities in the Kenton and Sea area, we often take schools, give them a day experience at Kariega, take them on game drives, that sort of thing, and expose them to wildlife. So there's so many initiatives, but you're quite right. A lot of people don't get that opportunity, to experience what we do and what our international guests experience.
You've had a good season this year. People are coming back. We're getting tourists back into this country post-COVID, aren't we?
Yeah, we went through a very tough 2 years, make no mistake about it. Anyone in tourism in the world basically fell off a cliff. But our season in the Eastern Cape, our big market is Europe, predominantly the UK and Germany. And so our high season runs from October through to April. So, we started bouncing back fairly nicely in March, April 2022. After going through Omicron, we thought it was going to be earlier than that. Then Omicron decimated us for a couple of months, and then March, April. And then we obviously had to go through our low season months, May to August. And in that time, the Kruger National Park and Sabi Sand Reserves were flying. The US market came in, and they had record months and years last year. And then we could really measure from October how were we doing. And we ran at about 75% of pre-COVID occupancies in October, November, about 85% in December, which was excellent. And then the bookings have almost doubled since the start of January. And January, February is a big booking window in Europe, because everyone's gone through, they're in winter, they've had Christmas, and now they're planning their next holiday. A lot of late bookings, so a lot of people are still booking today and are coming even in February, March and April.
Right.
And so our forward booking's starting to look really good, and it's really positive at the moment. And I think at the end of the day, people want to travel, people want to live, and we had this crisis in the world, and people want to get out there and experience life again, and that's what's happening, so let's hope it continues.
Let's hope it continues. And why should people, Mark, come to... We all know how wonderful this part of the country is, but why should people come to experience the wildlife in the Eastern Cape as opposed to the more traditional destinations that have been more famous in the past?
Yeah, look, your famous area of South Africa is definitely the Kruger National Park, and then you've got the Sabi Sands, where I call it, you've got the creme de la creme of game reserves in this country, the real name game reserves like Mala, Sabi, Londolozi, Singita, Lion Sands, all these game reserves up there. And then obviously, the Eastern Cape with internationally Shamwari leading the way. That we only call it from 1995 when it started gaining a bit of traction. We're only 28 years old, so we're very, very young. But we've value for money in the Eastern Cape. We're definitely not as expensive as the game reserves up north. And I'll challenge someone to go to a top game reserve there and come to, say, Settlers Drift at Kariega, and I think you'll realize that there shouldn't be such a discrepancy in price. And then our proximity to Cape Town on the garden route, I think we're in a very well-positioned place in South Africa, easy to get to, and a lot of people love to do the garden route. And then I think the stats show that 85% of international tourists go to Cape Town at some stage during their trip to South Africa. And then it's just either on a plane to Port Elizabeth, 1 hour flight, and then into the Eastern Cape Game Reserve, or you do the garden route. And then another big factor for us is we are in a malaria-free area. But we've got a great experience. It's a different experience to Kruger. We've got different landscape. The Kruger's sort of much flatter with this thick Kruger National Park bush, if you know what I mean. And we're very, very much more undulating. So we've got views and vistas and rivers. We've got rivers that especially run through Kariega and that type of thing. So, I think people have found the Eastern Cape and they love it. And we're a lovely part of South Africa. And also we got the people of the Eastern Cape are so nice. We've got wonderful people in the Eastern Cape, very humble and and nice people.
I mean, people watching, of course, tonight, and I'm just going to have a quick look at some of the questions. Well, because it's cricket and conservation, I've just been stuck into this. I'm sure we're going to find out some of the people that are watching.
Jeez, I recognise a few of these names.
No, come on, here we go. Here's Garth. There we go. That's the Big Five part of the Big Three. Oh, you were part of the Big Three at EP, apparently.
Yeah, okay.
What do you mean by that?
Garth, nice to see. I can't see you though, Garth. No, he's an old cricketer, Garth. Yeah, he had a big mouth when he played cricket. Great bowler.
Oh, good lad.
But yeah, so we won the treble. So that's what he's referring to. When we when was it? It was about 1991. We won the Curry Cup, the Nissan Shield, and the Benson Hedges.
Oh, super. Yeah, well done, Garth. Thanks for tuning in. Nice to see you, Marcus.
Keith Casey Clark, a fanatical cricket follower who loved following EP cricket in the old days, and he's come back to live in Port Elizabeth.
And as Brian says, at least it's got the crowds back in the ground again. Yes, St George's Park was absolutely rocking the other night for one of the games. Hello, Jeff. That's lovely. And Jeff Applewhite does so much for the Port Elizabeth and Eastern Cape, of course. We've got great ambassadors here. Come on, Sue.
Yeah, she loves Test cricket, you see. Sue Rhodes. Yeah.
Sue, we're not going to get rid of it. And there we are, Gareth. Thanks, Gareth.
Yeah.
Nice to see you. I'm glad Gareth has stayed in the Eastern Cape as well. We need him here. That's for sure. So we got some wonderful people who are watching this show, and of course this show is getting recorded and it will be shared again. So please do share this show later on. So anybody that's missed it, we had a bit of as we do here in most places in South Africa, we had some load shedding problems and internet issues which made us start a little bit later. So thank you for joining us tonight. But I wish you all the best with what you're doing out at Kariega. And at the end of the day, it's a legacy to what your dad's achieved. I know he was a great cricketer himself, and he must be so proud of what you have achieved as a family to continue what you're doing here in the Eastern Cape. And the great thing is the Rushmeres are staying here. You're not flitting off to Australia or England. You've committed to this area. You've created a business that's no doubt employing a lot of people. But not only that, you're reshaping the landscape here. So what do you think Dad would say today with some of the challenges? Do you think he'd be happy with how it's gone?
Well, it would be interesting if he died, 6 years ago. He lived a great life. He almost got to 80. He was just short of his 80th birthday. And but nothing got, that's why I think Dad was able to start something like Kariega. Nothing got Dad down, and he was a very positive person. He thought he could make anything work.
Brilliant.
And whereas a lot of people thought he was crazy with what he had tried at Kariega, I think even we thought, geez, Dad, what have you done here? You've created a bit of a white elephant, but we've made it work. But Dad saw our vision and everything, and he lived long enough to see settlers drift. He knew that we would ultimately get the last portion of land in the Bushmans River Valley, which we managed to acquire about a year ago. So I think Dad knew this would all happen. He would have worked it out in his head, but I'm not sure what he would say about COVID, how he would have sort of handled that. But knowing Dad, he would have been positive. He said, nah, we'll get through this. And I remember my brother saying to me, Graham, it was so good having him obviously with me in the business, saying, if you look at it, this is just going to be a blip. If you look over 50 years, COVID's just a little blip. But you had to get through it, you know what I mean? And you didn't know how long it was going to last.
Yeah.
But I always give, the credit to Dad. I mean, he had the guts to try something like this and incredible. And so Dad loved wildlife and he loved cricket. He was fanatical about the game of cricket. So he would talk for hours with you, if he was here about his views in conservation and cricket and all that sort of thing. So, we miss him. But, he had a great life. Mom's still here. She's still fit. And, she's always been a proper conservationist. So, but thanks for having me on the show.
It's
been great chatting here. And, we are real Eastern Cape people. And, we've got so much to offer. And we live in an unbelievable part of South Africa. We really do.
No, you do. And you're an ambassador for it, as your family is. And I'm looking forward to perhaps exploring a bit more of your history, maybe in a book going forward. So thanks for your time tonight, Mark.
Thanks, Dean. Nice being here.
Good night, everybody.
Thanks,
we'll
guys.
See you on the next episode of Frontierland. Thank you.